Hello and good evening. It is 7 o'clock. This is a Sky News special programme where we'll be asking, can we trust the police? We'll be answering your questions. The future of the Metropolitan Police and forces across the country in the spotlight again after a damning report into police standards.
What we have found right across the Met is institutional and systemic racism, sexism and homophobia.
The Metropolitan Police Commissioner rejects that charge but vows to take action to protect the public.
I'm doing everything possible to spot anybody and remove them who poses any risk to the public.
But over 20 years since structural failures were identified in the police after the death of Stephen Lawrence, we hear from the victims who are still being let down. Well, we'll get into your questions and concerns about the police in a moment. But first, let's take a closer look at the main points from Dame Louise Casey's review. Well, it found that the force, the Metropolitan Police, is institutionally racist, misogynistic and homophobic. It says a lack of vigilance towards officers abusing their positions has allowed for predatory behaviour to flourish. 12% of women in the Met said they experienced sexual harassment or assault, and rape cases have been dropped after key evidence was destroyed when overstuffed fridges and freezers broke. Well, most of the findings have been accepted by the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, with one important exception. He still insists that the problems within the force can't be defined as institutional.
I accept the findings of the report, absolutely.
The full findings of the report?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the point you're making.
You know exactly what I mean, Sir Mark. We're
report.
talking about your suggestions that you don't accept that your force is institutionally racist.
I absolutely accept the diagnosis that Louise Casey comes up with. We have racist, misogynist and homophobes in the organisation, and it's not just about individuals. We have systemic failings, management failings and cultural failings. The reason, and I respect Louise using that term, the reason I don't use it, I think it's a very ambiguous term. Your viewers would have different interpretations of what it means.
Well, let's bring in our home editor, Jason Farrell, for more on this. Jason, good to have you with us this evening. Now, Dame Louise Casey described Mark Rowley's task as climbing Mount Everest in flip-flops. Will he get there?
Well, I think everyone accepts it's going to take time, even the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, saying this will take years. And indeed, Louise Casey says this isn't going to happen overnight. There is a big problem here and it's going to take a while to root out those people who are causing that problem. She accepts that many officers who work within the police, the majority of them are very professional. They don't have this problem, but that doesn't change the fact that it is an institutional problem, in her view, because it seeps right through the force. And it's affecting, when we talk about sexism, it's not just the officers in the force who actually experience that sexism, but it kind of feeds into the investigations as well. And she says symbolic of that is, for example, these fridges that have been used to store evidence where they are broken or dilapidated or stuffed full of rape kits, and so much that they can't close the door. And in one instance, in the summer, when we had that heat wave, they actually lost samples, and that meant that rape cases couldn't go forward. And I think anyone who's ever had experienced sexual assault will be outraged, even if they haven't, by that fact that rape cases were ruined because evidence was ruined because it wasn't kept properly. And Louise Casey sees that as symbolic of the problem, and it is symbolic because, in a sense, the door is broken on the Metropolitan Police because it has become contaminated by misogynistic behaviour, by racism and by homophobia. So it is going to take time to go through all of those cases that the Met says they're going through now, looking back into the history of police officers to see if they have, for example, histories of domestic violence. But I think the big question is, where do you draw the line? What is the line in the sand on behaviour from the past that means you can't keep your job? In Louise Casey's view, she was very clear with me. She said anything like that and they should be sacked.
OK, Jason, for now, do appreciate that. Thank you. Now, you have been submitting your questions to us all afternoon, and I'm joined now by Palm Sandy, who was the first Asian female chief superintendent in the Met. Her memoir on her time in the police force is called Black and Blue, One Woman's Story of Policing and Prejudice. And also here is Michael Fuller, former Chief Constable of Kent Police and a former Met Commander who was also the Chief Inspector of the Crown Prosecution Service. Palm, Michael, really good to have you both with us this evening. Let's just get straight into the questions that we've had come in from our viewers. And this one is coming from Wilson. You can see it there on the screen. I'll read it out to you, Palm, if you can start with this. What's new in this Casey report that the public didn't already know about the Met since the Macpherson inquiry some 25 years ago?
I think that's a really good question because the answer is nothing. The Met was labelled as institutionally racist then, almost 25 years ago, and it's still carrying that label. And in fact, it's been expanded to include homophobia and misogyny. So that question, it's not one to say, yes, there's something new in there, but we're going round in circles. And the Met seems to have gone backwards in that there were some recommendations made and they were very positive and they were taken on. But over the last few years, that has been eroded and the Met has actually gone backwards.
Michael, would you agree that it's gone backwards? Have lessons been learned?
I think some of the issues are still there, that at the end of the day, the label institutional racism has been said before 25 years ago by William Macpherson. I think what matters now is what do we do? You know, how do we fix the problems? What's the plan? And that's the thing the chief officers in the Met need to answer.
I mean, these are the questions that were asked at the time of the Macpherson report, though, weren't they? Institutionally racist was the term. I remember it very well. So those questions will have been asked. It's not like they're new questions, right?
Well, there are some things that have happened, and of course, as you know, I've written about it. But at the end of the day, at the time, and I was in the Met at the time, and I spent 26 years in the Met, the racial discrimination was not a disciplinary offence. And post-Macpherson, that was changed. At the end of the day, the notion of hate crime wasn't in existence, and that was changed. At the end of the day, murder investigations are reviewed. The issue of double jeopardy in that people being able to be prosecuted again if there was new evidence that came to light was as a result of the Macpherson report. And, of course, it meant that some of the people involved in the killing of Stephen Lawrence were actually and have been convicted in a way that's pre the Macpherson report. They would not have been convicted.
How much of that would you agree with, Palm? I mean, there's some fundamental changes there laid out by Michael.
And I do agree with everything that Michael said. But one thing I would say is that at the time there was an argument about the label institutional racism. That argument is still carrying on. And I listened to Sir Mark. Absolutely. I listened to him this morning and he's still arguing about the term institutional and he's arguing it's systematic. He's used all sorts of other terminology. Well, the time for arguments about terminology have long gone. And now, as Michael has said, it's a time for action. People are tired of the reports that say the same thing. There are things fundamentally wrong with the Met. Do something about it.
Just a thought on that, because you've brought it up, and Mark Rowley's sort of reluctance to use the word institutionally. Why do you think he found it so difficult to use that word? He said he didn't want to use it, right? It's not a term he would use.
I think because it means that everyone is labelled. I had officers at the time say, well, I've got a black wife. I'm white, but I've got a black wife. How can I be racist? And, you know, I'm affected by this label, institutionally racist. But at the end of the day, you're looking at issues that are systemic in the way that, say, black people are treated in terms of stop and search, in terms of black and Asian officers. In fact, the fact they face, and more likely to face, as Louise Casey has pointed out, they're more likely to face disciplinary action. So there are those issues that are systemic and run through the whole system. And a lot of the things that were pointed out 25 years ago have still not been changed. They haven't been addressed successfully. And that's why I don't think the Met should be in denial. It should be looking forward. You know, how are we going to change? How are we going to provide an effective and a service to all of London and a service that doesn't discriminate?
Yeah, I've got loads more questions, but let's go to our viewers' questions because they've got better ones than me, I think. Right, this is William North now, which asks the question that I think many people are wondering after what we've seen come out of Louise Casey's report today. Why isn't the force broken up with immediate effect and set up a new police force with a new name, new staff, and remove, as William Law says, all the bad apples?
That's a difficult one to do, but there have been recommendations made about certain units being disbanded immediately, and that's including the firearms units that do the parliamentary protection and diplomatic protection, which is where Carrick and Casey were both based. So those recommendations have been made in Louise Casey's report today. Now, whether or not they're going to be acted on, that's a different matter, because I haven't heard anything coming from the Met to say that that is actually going to be actioned. And in relation to the bigger subject about reform, I think that Sir Mark has been given the last chance. People want to see the turnaround plan, but not 2 years from now. They want to see that turnaround plan being implemented now. And there are solutions, but if you don't admit you've got a problem, you're not going to find those solutions.
No, I mean, I guess you would agree with much of that breaking up the force is not the thing to do at this moment.
I think it'd be a distraction, actually. I've been involved in lots of restructurings of the Met. And at the end of the day, what I feel matters more is about leadership, that you have proper leadership and supervision of the staff. At the end of the day, Wayne Couzens, the nickname the rapist, well, who knew that and who did something about it? You know, if you've got supervisors, other colleagues of that officer suspecting that somebody is a rapist, you know, what did they do about it? And there must be some culpability amongst people who knew that somebody was a bad apple and didn't do anything about it.
I mean, you've touched on one of the things that really occurred to me today. I mean, you guys have both worked in the force for a long period of time. When you know things like that, why aren't those things rooted out?
Well, yeah, I think the Met should be asked that, because that's what they've got to do to change things to the better.
It's not just the Met who have these problems, is it?
No, it isn't just the Met. But I think at the end of the day, we want an effective police service. We want protection. And we want protection that gives protection to women and girls, people who might be vulnerable in some way. We want protection for all and a service that serves everybody in London and does that in a fair way. That's something I felt successfully in Kent, and I didn't tolerate any discrimination, any misogyny. We had 30% more women selected whilst I was there, because we took out discriminatory processes from the promotion selection systems. And I think the zero tolerance approach and leadership by those, and we're not talking about people just at the top, it's people at the bottom of the supervision ladder who have far more influence on the culture of the organisation.
And Pam, did you see some of that culture?
I was just about to say, I can tell you why people don't stand up, because if they do stand up and they call out bad behaviour of their colleagues, the chances of that being investigated are very slim. I think it's 7 out of 10 cases are not proceeded with. And the person who is brave enough to stand tall is then alienated, victimised, demonised, and they become subject of complaints, malicious complaints themselves. That's why there's no safe environment for people to whistleblow.
Well, the question is there are structures in place to protect whistleblowers.
There are structures, but they are not. They seem to protect the protagonists more, and that's actually in Louise Casey's report. She's actually commented on the fact that the people who actually raise the complaints, the burden for them is too heavy to bear, and it becomes a protection system for the person who's in the wrong in the first place.
And maybe that's a way that it could be turned around quite quickly. It would seem... Michael?
I would agree with that, but I say that's wrong. If you see something wrong and you report it, you shouldn't be seen as the problem.
No.
If you face discrimination, you face bullying, you shouldn't then be seen as a problem. So there must be protections for people who raise legitimate grievances, or even if they're considered not legitimate. There should be protections for people with freedom, for people to raise those complaints.
Perhaps that goes back to the overall culture, though, of police forces.
Yeah, it does. It's systemic.
Let's move on to the question now from Tess, if we can. And this is maybe a bit of a controversial one here. I want you guys to give us your opinion on this. It says, it's been argued that police are academically uneducated, and if it would be mandatory that you had a degree to join the police force, would that improve the system, Pam?
One of the best things that's happened recently is the fact that people who are joining now are being put onto a degree programme. So that comment there would no longer apply. And the new recruits are part of the positive change for the future, because they are diluting that toxic culture. They are changing it. They won't tolerate it. And by getting rid of that old guard and those old attitudes, that's how you will actually change the Met. So in relation to that question, new officers will be getting a degree at the end of their probationary periods. And if they don't study or they don't achieve that status or they do something wrong, they can be removed from their positions quite quickly. It's easy to get rid of a probationer and it's very difficult to get rid of somebody who's got more service.
Yeah, Michael, I mean, I bet you're an advocate of life London and you became a KC during your time in the force.
No, QPM. But at the end of the day, yes, I've got 4 degrees, but I mean, that doesn't make you a good leader. I can remember Kent that all my management team had master's degrees. But at the end of the day, that doesn't make you a good leader. That training people in leadership and effective supervision are the most important things. And you have people who are very competent and professional at their job. Yep. And I had a good experience last Saturday in London where I called out police to a rave in a park, an illegal rave. And all the officers who didn't know who I was very scruffily dressed, were very polite and respectful for me, dealt with the issue, and I thanked them afterwards. And I thought, gosh, you know, if only the Met were like that all the time, polite, professional, responsive, which they haven't always been, that everybody would be pleased. And I didn't feel any judgment about what I looked like.
That is good that you weren't judged on the way you were dressed, Michael. Let's move on to the next question that we have on here. And this is about the Met and policing broadly, nationally. It says, the Met is the model for UK policing. Where does this leave us nationally, especially as smaller forces have less oversight? I mean, from Kent Police...
I think the Met tries to do too much, to be honest. It has national responsibilities. And I think, personally, the focus should be on policing London and the problems in London. London's a complex city to police. And when the Met does things well, it does them really well. We saw with the Queen's funeral, you know, we've seen with lots of other public events and response to terrorism, the Met has responded very well and professionally. But, you know, when it gets things wrong, it's disastrous. And it's very complex to sort out because of the size of it. So, yeah, just focus on London and London's problems. Yep. But restructuring is a huge undertaking, and that's not something I would want to do. I've been through 3, and it's a distraction from some of these issues that we're talking about. We need to focus on fixing these problems.
Palm, I think implied in that question as well is that the Met is looked up to by other forces around the country. Is that the experience? Do other police officers in different parts of the country look towards the Met Police as being the pinnacle of policing? What
I would say is that there are police officers up and down the country, including in the Met, who work incredibly hard and they do very, very difficult jobs. And the majority of them are good, hard-working individuals. Now, I don't think that there is a hierarchy in that somebody's better than anybody else or a force is better. But because the Met have got more resources, they've got more opportunities to diversify into different departments, it may be seen as having more opportunities, but I don't think it's seen as being better than any other force.
One of the things that came up earlier today was the idea of taking parts of the force away. We talked about counter-terrorism as well, and maybe being folded into the National Crime Agency. Do you see that as being a viable way, do you think, of taking some of that pressure off that you mentioned?
I still think that's a distraction. I mean, you've got the culture that existed within the diplomatic protection group and amongst those officers was clearly wrong. And you know, what is being done to change that culture, change some of those people?
What was that about? Is that because they were carrying guns, they were seen as sort of elite officers? You're nodding your head.
Yes.
Right. Is that the thing?
There is a sort of hierarchy within policing, and if there's a huge amount of training to become a firearms officer, so it is seen as being part of an elite unit. And also they get more money spent on them because they're buying the guns, they're buying the body armour, they're buying all the latest kit. And when you go to frontline officers, the ones who come out to the 999 calls or the illegal raves in the park, they don't have as much money or resources. They are working on very tight budgets and shift work. So yes, there is a hierarchy in different units and different departments. And unfortunately, those are the departments that are very insular. They think that they're better than everybody else. They don't mingle, they don't talk to other people. And brand new recruits go to the front line, which is why the culture will change. Brand new recruits will not end up in a firearms unit, which is why I do support what Louise Casey has said about disbanding those units.
Yeah.
The only thing I'd say is that I commanded Operation Trident, which was dealing with gun crime in London over a 4-year period. And each year I'd command up to about 75 armed operations. And I would say, because it would have been in the news, all those operations that we dealt with throughout the year were always carried out very professionally and with meticulous planning. Because if there'd been mistakes, you'd have heard about them.
I mean, there are mistakes, though, as we know, we've seen with John Charles Menezes and recently as well.
But that wasn't part of the operation. But yes, you know, if you have human beings actually involved in these things. But the point is that over a 4-year period of the operations I commanded, there weren't mistakes, and the operations were conducted very professionally by the firearms officers.
I think one of the other criticisms as well of those elite units, as we've been describing, is that they can be kind of closed shops as well. So when there is any attempt at whistleblowing, it's all part of an elite club, and people feel less inclined to blow the whistle on their mates.
And I think that is a real problem. But then you get back to what I said at the start, is you need people who are good leaders and effective leaders and supervisors of those people. And I think also that they need to be accountable. So if there's an issue with an officer under their command, what I always found was that I was also subject of complaint, and I was as accountable as the officer who was junior. And I think that was very important. But it made sure that I had very tight control over what people did under my command.
Sense of accountability is vital. Michael, we'll leave it there for a moment. We're going to move on to take a look at the victims of these incidents of police. For all the talk of institutional failings, the reality of police failure for many is a legacy of loss, trauma and fear. Ashna Hurinag has this.
In 2020, Faye says she was assaulted by a stranger on her way home, an event that left her traumatised and feeling the Metropolitan Police did not take her seriously.
I felt belittled and dismissed over the phone. I didn't feel that it was taken seriously. The fact that I wasn't assured that this might not happen to someone else, that the Met couldn't dispatch somebody to patrol the area, just made me have really little faith in how much they value women's safety or public safety.
The force's review of Faye's account deemed the service they provided was acceptable, but said that several points of learning were identified. The report added, "I apologise on behalf of the Metropolitan Police that you felt it necessary to complain." Zara Alina was minutes from her front door when in June last year she was attacked and killed by a man who was on licence and had just been released from prison. Jordan McSweeney had followed several women that night, but the alarm was never raised. Zara's aunt blames this on a lack of trust between the community and the Met.
Why didn't those women call the police? Is it because they don't think they're going to be taken seriously? Is it because they're so scared of what officers have done to women themselves?
Trust that's particularly hard to find in some communities. June and Shola have been working with marginalised people and the Metropolitan Police for decades. They praise some of the officers they've worked with, but this review confirms what they suspected of the wider force.
As a black male, I've been stopped by the police so many times, I can't even tell you how many times.
If we keep waiting on report after report to get this right, how many more lives are we going to lose or affect or have traumatised young people coming up?
A retired DCI from the Met who worked on the Wayne Couzens investigation says keeping existing officers will be difficult.
The majority of people are hard-working, that now that retention of those officers has got to be part of this as well, to keep the good ones there to change things for good, because they're going to feel like this is a personal attack on them.
To avoid an incident like this, all sides agree change is needed. This review was commissioned because these women were failed. Baroness Casey's findings show Britain's largest police force is continuing to fail large parts of Britain's capital. Ashna Hurinag, Sky News.
Well, Ashna's report just really lays out the difficulties facing in policing and trying to help victims of crime. And this next question here that's coming from an anonymous viewer really sort of lays that out. I'll read it out in full. How can I know when I'm walking home from the train station after work that what happened to Sarah Everard won't happen to me? How can women in the UK trust the law and the officers that supposedly carry out their duty as sworn protectors when the Met failed Sarah? I mean, it's a really emotive question, Parliament. It's a huge question to ask, but it's really the fear that many people have. at a time like this after a report that's so damaging?
And I think that the question itself is one that cannot be answered because trust and confidence in policing is well below the 50% in the London area, and it's fallen, and it's dramatically fallen. And until that trust and confidence is restored, then policing by consent is at risk. And that is a horrible thing to say. And even when you look at the Wayne Couzens and the Carrick and the other people that have come to notice, I'm not sure that there isn't another one somewhere along the way. There could be another one of those individuals within the Met. But what I would say is that if there is anybody at home that needs help and that is in immediate danger, they should pick up the phone and they should ask for that help. And it's really important that we get that message over, because otherwise we are going to lose people. We are going to have people who are being beaten, who are suffering, and who could possibly be killed by other people. But in relation to trusting the police, that's something that's going to come back in time.
And in time, but how long will that take?
Well, I think it will take a long time. But at the end of the day, I mean, I know that trust is lacking. I had a few weeks ago a woman who was on my doorstep, looked the worse for drink, about 2 or 3 in the morning. I thought it was my daughter. It wasn't. And she said she was just using it as my doorstep as a safe refuge because it had a bright street light. And it made me feel that the streets don't look very safe because they are very dark with austerity. And it's not just the police who need to increase safety and confidence of people. The issue of public protection, I think, concerns local authorities as well. And I think we've forgotten this issue of the fact that it's important that the public are properly protected. The police are there to catch criminals, but they're also there to protect the public and everybody. And this woman didn't feel safe because I said, well, she was under threat from her boyfriend. I offered to call the police, and she said, no.
She didn't want to contact...
She didn't want the police being called, which made, it's quite a shock for me. But anyway, she was safe and there was a happy ending.
Well, that's good to hear, but it's so concerning that she would not want to get the police involved in an incident when she doesn't feel safe.
Yeah, and it brings home the fact that there is an extreme lack of confidence in policing at the moment. People have got to feel safe. And of course, the vast majority of officers, and that's important, the vast majority of officers are very professional and in the way they respond and in the way they behave. So... people can't feel afraid of actually dialing 999 if they're under threat and in a state of emergency in some way, and that they need to call the police. Yeah. They've got to feel confident about doing that.
But reports like this just don't help that at all, do they?
They don't, no.
Let's move on to the next question here, and this is about Sir Mark Rowley. So I'm not sure how much you guys are going to want to comment on this, but I'll put it to you anyway. How many years did the current Commissioner serve in the Met senior management before being appointed to his current role, and how did he not notice what was going on? Why didn't he speak out? And why should he be the man to make change now? Palm, I'm going to put that to you first.
You saw me smiling.
I did, that's why.
I think that perhaps that question would be best suited for Mark Rowley himself.
I mean, Kay tried to put some of that to him this morning, and he didn't really... Everyone has given him their support. Both sides of the political divide have given him his support. The Mayor of London's given him his support to try and make change.
Yes. I know that he was there in 2018 because I left in 2019, and I'm at a loss to answer the question as to why didn't he see it, because he was in charge of the firearms units. He was in charge of the Wayne Couzens and the Carrick case. So how did he not notice? And I did see his response this morning that he was too busy fighting ISIS. Well, you're fighting ISIS and you don't see what's happening under your nose. And are women of this country less important? That's the question I'd be asking.
I think what I'd say, and it's not sidestepping the issue, is that he's now got a chance to change things for the better.
But why should he get that chance when he was there before and it was all going wrong?
He's seen the Met from the inside. He knows how it works. One of the biggest problems that independent people I've found who come from other police forces have had in the Met, and I've served over 26 years under lots of different leaders, is that those who are from outside London, it takes them a long time to get to know the city, the complexities of policing a big, complex capital. So he hasn't got that. So, at the end of the day, he's got some serious issues that he's got a chance to address. And he's going to be judged by that as to how effective he is at addressing and leading the people under his charge.
But with that, with there being so many concerns about the way that the force is working and with people's lives literally being on the line about this, should he be given that chance to do that? I mean, just as a thought experiment, if he was to be removed and someone was to replace him, would that be the sort of clean sweep, the new broom that you need, do you think?
Well, he is a new broom, and his deputy...
You're shaking your head, sorry.
He's a new commissioner, and he's got the chance to do something about the issues.
Whilst he might be allowed to have the opportunity to change the Met, I don't think he is a new broom. And I do disagree a little bit with you, Michael, there, because when we talk about independence, that doesn't mean that you bring somebody in from outside London if that's not what you want to do. It doesn't mean that somebody who has been in London has got the magic touch to make those problems go away. And having an independent person, sometimes it shines the torch where you may not be looking. Because Louise Casey is independent. All of the evidence that she's produced was part of the Met evidence, it's part of Met data, and yet the people who were within the Met didn't see it, didn't notice it, didn't think it was a problem, and it took an independent person. So in my view, that he's not a new broom, he was there before, he's gone back. How is that independent? How is that a new broom? OK, he's new at a commissioner, but he was an assistant commissioner before. So I do disagree with you.
Let me push you on that then. So where should the person to lead an organisation like the Metropolitan Police come from then, if not from someone who knows the force and knows the city as Michael lays out?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that, but I can say that it needs to be somebody independent, as does the complaints procedures, because at the moment you've got police officers who are managing the complaints department, who the week before could have been working with a Wayne Couzens or a Carrick, and now they're investigating those same people. They may have been complicit, they may have been laughing at the jokes, they may have been calling him the rapist in an endearing manner. So those are the people who investigate complaints. That's not independence, and that's why those complaints just go round and round and there's nothing to come of them.
I mean, there's something really fundamental at the base of this. I've been racking my brain as to work out where the real change needs to be made. And if you think it's at the top, you don't think it's at the top. You know, policing by consent is something that we all live by.
I disagree with that. I think it does need to be at the top, but it needs to be all throughout the organisation. So it wasn't just the people at the top who were calling... It wasn't the people at the top who were calling Wayne Couzens the rapist. You know, there were people who worked very closely with him who would have known or suspected about his activities, and what did they do about it? You know, I don't know. But, I mean, the point being
not
that
enough.
It is about the leadership of the organisation, and I think the acid test is how good a leader that person at the top is, but also those people all throughout the organisation who have the opportunity to influence and affect and identify the bad apples. Yeah. And they're few and far between, but there will be people who will know of the bad apples, and they've got to have safe systems of reporting and be able to report them so that they're tackled and they're kicked out. I mean, my policy in Kent, and I'm not just saying this academically, was if I had officers who I felt were a risk, because of indiscretions in terms of allegations that were made in terms of sexual indiscretions, they were dismissed. And I was happy with that, and the rest of the force were happy with that, and more important, the public were happy with that. So I don't think anyone was unfairly treated. They were all given due process. But the point is, I would not take the risk of keeping them within the organisation. I don't think the Met should do that either.
I mean, how do you think Met police officers have been feeling today? I've seen a few of them out and about on the streets today, of course, keeping us all as safe as they can. How do you think, like, serving officers would be feeling right now?
I think that the majority of officers who are good and caring individuals will be absolutely distraught at this report, distraught at the labels that have been offered out. But at the same time, they're also angry because police officers who shouldn't be in the force have been allowed to linger and stay. There's some case studies that Louise has used where officers have been in the force up to 2 years after allegations of sexual misconduct have come to light. They've racked up another 11 or 12 complaints against them that are known, and there may be others that have not complained. So those people have stayed within the force. So the good and caring officers are frustrated that even when they raise their head and they say, I'm working with the rapist, that allegation isn't going to go anywhere. That doesn't mean that person's going to be removed.
Do you think that Baroness Casey's report will give confidence to those officers, the good officers who may see wrongdoing happening and feel like they couldn't report it before, but perhaps after this they could? Well, clearly... Is there enough in there to give them that sense of confidence?
Well, the report highlights the fact that clearly the disciplinary processes haven't worked, in the officers who should have been really kicked out of the police haven't been, and that the vetting processes haven't worked. And those are the issues I feel the people at the top have got a chance to put right. And we're talking some of the political people in governance over the police, can actually change the sort of current restrictions that prevented the officers actually being removed from the policing. Because we want police officers who are honest, who we can trust, who we respect, who are ethical and professional in the way they behave. And clearly, the current disciplinary regulations in the way they've operated haven't allowed that to happen.
Yeah, plenty of work still to be done.
I've had a few messages from serving officers today because I'm still a mentor, and one of them was, "This report is 10 years too late." Another one was, "About time, and thank God she called it out for what it is." So that's the general opinion of the serving officers. And, there are a lot of them that are really disillusioned because of what's been allowed to happen over the last few years.
We certainly have the strength to come forward after this, Michael.
And one of the things is we've seen a lot of reports, but I mean, what matters to me is what you're going to do to fix it.
Yeah.
So I think, the focus needs to be on not police bashing, but actually fixing the problems that have been identified.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to be most important, not for it to be a political football, because that never gets us anywhere. And I've seen that over a 25-year period.
Well, let's hope that in a few years' time we're not sitting around having the similar discussion about a major police force in the UK. Palm Sandu and Michael Fuller, really appreciate your time, really enlightening. Great discussion. Thank you very much, both of you, this evening.